Welcome to the Wealth Wisdom, where knowledge becomes power and power builds your future.
You've been told your financial struggles are your fault. That if you just saved more, worked harder, avoided debt, and stayed disciplined, everything would eventually line up. But what if that idea is a smoke screen? What if the money missing from your life was stolen long before you were even born, and not by a thief in the night, or a corrupt official stuffing bills into a suitcase, but by a system so old and so deeply built into the world that most people don't even realize it exists? Because the real story of why wealth is so hard to build today didn't begin with you, or your parents, or even your grandparents. It began generations ago with a decision made behind closed doors, by men whose names most people never learn, yet whose choices silently shaped every paycheck, every loan, every price tag, every crisis, and every ounce of economic stress you've ever felt. This is the story of how money was stolen before you were born, and how the theft still continues. For this, we must go back not decades, but centuries before digital banking, before Wall Street skyscrapers, even before modern governments understood what economics really was. Back to a time when money wasn't something abstract on a screen, but a physical object with weight, value, and limits. Gold, silver, metal that couldn't be printed at will, couldn't be manipulated by typing on a keyboard, couldn't be created out of thin air. If a king wanted more money, he had to get more gold, conquer land, buy mines, or increase trade. There were limits, and limits kept power in check. And that is exactly what certain people wanted to escape. Because for rulers, bankers, and early states, gold-based money was both a blessing and a chain. It kept inflation low, yes, but it also restricted how much debt a government could take on. It restricted their wars. It restricted how much influence they could buy. Gold disciplined power, and powerful people hated that. So the earliest version of the theft didn't start with paper money or central banks. It started with a simple trick, taking real metal coins and quietly replacing that metal with something cheaper, copper instead of silver, silver instead of gold, then stamping the king's face on it as if nothing had changed. It worked. For a while, prices rose. Citizens grew poorer. The state grew richer, until people caught on. But the pattern was established. If you control the money, you control the people. For thousands of years, this game repeated. Empires rose and fell on its own. China's dynasties, medieval kingdoms, but the most sophisticated version wouldn't arrive until the 17th century, when a new idea entered history: the central bank. Not a vault, not a treasury, but a private institution, often controlled by elite families, that governments borrowed from, and in return, those families gained immense influence. The first major example was the Bank of England in 1694. The government was broke after war. The bank offered money, but demanded control, interest, authority, debt backed not by gold, but by the future taxes of citizens. The people didn't vote on this. They weren't asked. Their labor was quietly pledged for generations. This was the beginning of money created from nothing, the beginning of debt becoming the world's real currency. But it wouldn't go global until one country knew, ambitious, and destined to become a superpower entered the game, the United States. And the story here is filled with fights, secret meetings, and consequences still unfolding today. When America was founded, the founders openly warned against central banking. They hated the idea of private groups controlling money. But as the country grew, so did the pressure for a modern system. Banks wanted power, politicians wanted easy money. And in 1910, on a secluded island off the coast of Georgia, Jekyll Island, 7 of the most powerful bankers, businessmen, and politicians met in secrecy. No press, no public awareness. For 9 days they drafted a plan that would eventually become the Federal Reserve. They understood exactly what they were creating. A system that allowed a small group to control the supply of money, determine interest rates, rescue failing banks with newly created dollars, and most importantly expand credit in ways the world had never seen. When the Federal Reserve Act passed in 1913, almost no ordinary citizen realized what it meant. They would no longer decide how much their money was worth. A small group would, quietly, permanently, and within a single generation. The consequences started. In the 1920s, the Fed expanded credit. Banks loaned money recklessly. People borrowed to invest, believing markets could never fall. And then, in 1929, when the bubble they had unknowingly helped create burst, the fallout became the Great Depression. Businesses collapsed, farms were lost, unemployment hit record levels. And yet, through it all, one thing remained untouched: the power of the institution that helped create the problem. The cost was paid by families, not the system. But the most important turning point came in 1971, and most people alive today have no idea how deeply this one decision changed their lives. For most of history, the US dollar was backed by gold. Other countries trusted it because they believed America had real gold to support it. But after decades of wars, rising debt, and overspending, foreign nations started doubting the US had enough gold to cover its promises. They asked to redeem their dollars for gold. The gold began to disappear from American vaults. It became clear the system as it existed could not hold. Then, in August 1971, President Richard Nixon delivered a short, calm speech to the nation. In it, he announced the US would temporarily suspend the ability for other countries to exchange dollars for gold. He promised it would stabilize the economy and protect the currency. It was not temporary. It was permanent, and it ended the last connection between money and reality. From that moment on, money became whatever the government said it was. Dollars could be created in unlimited amounts with the press of a button. Debt could rise forever, and the value of every existing dollar, the savings of workers, the retirements of families, the wages of millions quietly began to erode. Theft doesn't always require violence. Sometimes it only requires inflation, and inflation becomes inevitable when new money is created faster than real wealth. From the 1970s onward, the numbers tell a shocking story. Wages stopped rising at the same pace as productivity. The cost of housing skyrocketed. Education became unaffordable. Medical expenses exploded. Debt levels grew year after year after year. But the money supply, it grew faster than everything else. This is not an accident. It is the predictable result of a system built on expanding debt. And here's where the generational theft becomes impossible to ignore. If your grandparents bought a home in the 1960s or 70s, the price of that home relative to their income was dramatically lower than what young people face today. College tuition was affordable. A single income could support a family. Savings earned real interest. The future felt safe. But today, your savings lose value every year. Your income grows slower than prices. Your debt grows faster than your wealth. And every major asset from homes to stocks to land is priced far beyond what ordinary people can reach. This didn't happen naturally. It happened because the money system changed and every generation afterward paid the price. Money created without limit dilutes the value of existing money. Debt-based currency forces citizens into lifetime borrowing. And the interest on that debt flows upward to the institutions that issue it. This is why wealth inequality keeps rising. Not because people at the bottom got lazier, but because the rules of the game were rewritten. And the result is a world where a few institutions create money, banks multiply it through loans, governments spend it before it loses value, and ordinary citizens receive it last after prices have already risen. This is wealth extraction by design. Quiet, technical, hidden behind economic language and political speeches, but real enough that every generation feels it. The pattern repeats in crisis after crisis. When the dot-com bubble burst in 2000, interest rates were cut and money was pumped in. When the housing market collapsed in 2008, trillions were created to rescue financial institutions. When the 2020 pandemic hit, governments printed more money than any time in history. Each crisis results in the same outcome. The wealthy recover faster, while ordinary people see their purchasing power decline. Because when new money enters the system, it enters at the top. By the time it reaches the bottom, prices have already adjusted upward. This is how the theft continues not once, but every single year. And yet, most people still believe the struggle is personal. They think they're failing because they're not saving enough, not working enough, not planning enough. They blame themselves. That is the final trick of the system. It hides the mechanism so people blame their own effort instead of the structure around them. But here's the twist: while the system is deeply flawed, understanding it is the first step toward escaping its grip. Because patterns repeat, and once you see them, you can position yourself differently. You can stop playing the game the old way. You can stop relying on savings alone. You can start building assets that rise with inflation instead of being destroyed by it. You can stop thinking like a consumer and start thinking like someone who understands the system. Before ending this story, there are 3 takeaways that should stay with you long after this video ends. First, the money system you live in today was built over generations, shaped by decisions you never voted for, negotiated by people you never met, and structured in ways that quietly drain value from ordinary lives. If you feel financially behind, it's not your imagination. Second, every economic cycle, every bubble, every crisis, every unexpected crash follows the same cause and effect pattern. Excess credit, rising debt, inflated asset prices, collapse, rescue, repeat. Once you see the pattern, you stop being surprised. You start preparing. Third, the system will not reverse itself. Inflation will not magically disappear. Debt will not shrink. Governments will not voluntarily stop printing money. Waiting for the world to fix itself is not a strategy. Understanding the rules and adapting your strategy is. The story of how money was stolen before you were born is not a conspiracy. It is a structure, a design, a pattern repeated across centuries. And the real question is not whether the system is fair. It never was. The real question is whether you will continue to play by rules written generations ago, or begin learning how to navigate a world built on hidden forces. If you found this eye-opening, share it with someone who needs to understand what's really happening. And if you want more content like this, deep dives into the systems, decisions, and hidden forces shaping your life, make sure to like this video, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Because once you understand how the system works, the system stops working on you.